Okay. Let's call the meeting of the County Services Committee together to order tonight. And would ask Ms. Ann to do the prayer and pledge.
Please stand. Oh God, give us the courage to do what's right for this county. Give us the wisdom through Jesus Christ our Lord's name. Amen.
Amen.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, let's, any changes to the program or to the agenda?
move we adopt the agenda.
Second.
Printed.
All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Agenda passed. Mr. Clell Ford, Executive Director of the Beaver Watershed Alliance, and he's going to share with us about what they're doing out here to preserve water quality and help us with our county roads.
Yes, sir. A little bit of everything. Good evening, Justice. Thank you very much for inviting me, particularly Justice Bowman. I don't know when the last time was someone from the Beaver Watershed Alliance came and addressed the quorum court, even the committee of it. This is my first time, so I'm very happy to be here talking with you all about what sort of things that we do. So let's talk about, first of all, what is the Alliance? We're a 501c3 nonprofit working right here in Washington County and throughout the Beaver Watershed. Our main goal, the main thing that drives us forward, is this mission to protect, proactively enhance and sustain Beaver Lake and the integrity of the watershed. And a lot of y'all live in the watershed. Certainly, you're familiar with it. You know, the other folks who have their other slogans, and we're just a part of what protects the entire watershed itself. So our principal focus is reducing pollutant transport to Beaver Lake. Source water protection, because that's where our water comes from. We work with cooperative partners of any sort, both governmental and non-governmental agencies and things like that. We work a lot on trying to get funding for unpaved roads. Green infrastructure. What's green infrastructure? It's where we're trying to recreate the sort of environment we used to have, where the water would go into the ground rather than run straight off. We see a lot of energy coming from that pavement we've got. We're trying to reduce that energy going downstream. Stream bank restoration is a big part of what we do. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. Expansion of native plant material for restoration projects. We actually just got a grant from the USDA that is going to help us expand a lot of the sort of production of native plants that we need. Every restoration project that is done out there requires that you have native plant material, but there's not enough native plant material from Northwest Arkansas to actually do the work. So we're trying to work with producers to create that business, essentially a business model for a lot of the small farmers within our watershed. And then a lot of our forest, a lot of the watershed is forest, 70% right now, and we need to do a lot more healthy forest management. So where are we? You all know we're in the Boston Mountains, Ozark Mountain region, 1,195 square miles of area that basically slides into right there. Includes all or part of 17 municipalities in Northwest Arkansas, 7 of those in Washington County. You all are familiar with the 2 big ones, but we also have Elkins and Goshen, Greenland, West Fork, and Winslow. Those are actually really, really important to us because that's where a lot of the growth is going to be happening in the future. Talked to some folks from one of the bigger cities up north, Springdale, and they basically told me we're not going to be growing to the east. We're going to grow into the west. So a lot of the impacts we're going to see in our watershed are going to come from these smaller cities.
I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
What is the different shades in the map there? The gray, could you tell us about that?
Sure. Each of these shades are the subbasins for the actual watershed. The one here on the far west is the West Fork. This one is the Middle Fork. Now, if you can see my cursor moving on there.
No, can't see it.
You can't see the cursor moving. Well, I should have brought my pointer. Let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit.
Well, you just described the color would be helpful. All right,
there
that's
we go.
fine. That's good.
Yeah, West Fork. is right there around the Greenland, runs from Winslow all the way basically to where it intersects with where the water comes out of Lake Sequoia. The Middle Fork right in here, also headwaters up on the ridge here. The East Fork runs down into Lake Sequoia. Elkins is about right in that area. Then this purple-ish color is Richland Creek. The White River itself kind of has a small portion of that. It's a part of, these are all based upon hydrologic unit codes, Huck 10 codes they call them. These are actually Huck 8 codes. Brush Creek is this orange area. We have a lot of focus in Brush Creek. And those are actually, there's a little bit of War Eagle Creek. The county boundary, kind of, those are the sub-basins that are in Washington County. The biggest sub-basin we have is War Eagle, which stretches all the way from the headwaters here in Boston and in St. Paul, all the way down to the lake itself. Then the lake itself, of course, is this brownish color downstream. So there's an awful lot of watershed that's upstream of the lake itself, and that's really where our concern is. That's where our work is happening. Yep. So thank you for asking that. I don't get that question very often. I appreciate that. So the questions are always welcome. Let's see if I can get this back. There we go. Of course, Beaver Dam, everybody knows, it was built in the mid-'60s. One thing that folks don't know about it, and I learned this just from listening to wise people, normally the Army Corps of Engineers, they have to, their reason for building dams is flood control, or maybe it's for hydroelectric power generation. Well, in the case of Beaver Dam, they kind of changed the rules, and they said Beaver Dam should be built for water supply. And that's the primary reason it was built. Of course, it also provides flood control and the other function, a little electricity generation. But it has become the water supply for 500,000 people in Arkansas. Everybody from Harrison all the way to the Oklahoma border, everybody drinks water from Beaver Lake, from one of the 4 providers on the lake. So, looking more at this watershed itself. So what we do is strictly a voluntary activity. Everything we do, we put out best management practices. We go at it from the entire watershed approach. Most of our watershed is upstream of the lake, but we also have an important role to play actually on the lake and on downstream. A lot of scientific investigation going on. We just are in the middle of doing a study of, we didn't think ponds. Everybody knows how ponds work. What we're trying to prove to one of our funding agencies, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, that you can use ponds on farms to actually treat water before it runs in the lake. You'd think they'd know that already, but they have to have a little more science before they'll actually allow us to use ponds for source water protection. That's really what we're all about. And we have this idea of adaptive management. We see something that works, that's great, we try to stay with it. We see something that's not quite working, we have to have the flexibility to move and change what we're trying to get done. So we have this, basically a strategy that's been put in place. It was started in 2009, the Beaver Lake Watershed Protection Strategy. It's an effort initiated by the Northwest Arkansas Council and a lot of other large businesses in Northwest Arkansas. I don't have to name them, you know who they are. But they realized this is, at that time, 2009, there were 300,000 people in Northwest Arkansas. Now we got 500. That's how fast we're growing. And they realized we really have to get a handle on how we're going to protect our water supply. And that's what the Alliance is all about. The 3 overarching goals: maintain that long-term high-quality drinking water supply for everybody in the area. At that time, present was a smaller supply than we need now. And we're going to grow even more, double by 2040, I believe is the time. Restore water quality of impaired stream and lake areas. I'll talk a little bit about impaired stream reaches in a second. And then minimize those additional costs and regulations. We are not a regulatory body. The Beaver Watershed Alliance does not have any regulatory authority. We don't write regulations. We don't enforce them. We are there just for voluntary activities. And we've been fairly successful at being able to leverage funds and to encourage people to do these best management practices. We're in the middle of our 2020 update. We're supposed to update this watershed protection strategy every 5 years. The last time it was updated in 2012, so clearly we're right on track to be late for it. So we get it done, but it does take a lot of effort to get those sorts of things done. This is the first 9-element plan adapted, accepted by the U.S. EPA in the state of Arkansas. And there have been several more since then because small agencies, small watershed groups like ourselves, you can't do any of that. You can't get grants anymore from the government unless you have one of these 9-element plans. So proportionally, by how much of the actual watershed area does Washington County take up? Well, you're right at this 30% number right here. 30%, Madison County's got you beat just by a little bit, by about 49%, but a very large proportion of the watershed is in Washington County. Particularly this lower number here, this 979.6, that's how many miles of stream are actually in Washington County. You don't realize that. You're driving around, you think, all the lake is where all the action is. The streams are really the most important part of that. And that we feel very strongly because a lot of the problems we see come from those streams. So here we are. This is the kind of the area where the watershed is. Washington County is 30%. 30% of the watershed is Washington County. The most urbanized portion of the watershed is in Washington County. So also it's the impaired portion of the watershed. Town Branch, right in that area, just coming out of Fayetteville. West Fork. I'll get the right thing going here. West Fork is also an impaired stream reach. The same way with the Middle Fork. All of those are listed by the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality as being impaired. Some of them for sediment, some of them for various other minerals, which I'm kind of disagree with, but so what? That doesn't matter to Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. But there are things that we legitimately do have to take care of out there, particularly
before you
sediment.
move on from that, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I think the previous executive director of the Beaver Water told me that the West Fork was a major source of one of the primary sources of sediment coming into Beaver.
It is, yes, sir, that's correct. We had one farmer in the West Fork from May of 2017 to May of 2018, and we've just finished a project on this property, a stream restoration project. He lost 4 acres of land over the course of a year. We measured it. So 4 acres of land, you can see that. I mean, that's a lot of land that you can't farm anymore. It's now down in the lake, and this is happening throughout the West Fork. Whether or not that's the number one source of sediment, I think the folks over in Madison County in the War Eagle might debate that, but there's an awful lot of sediment coming down the West Fork, and that we have a lot of good information on that.
Well,
so yes, sir.
Have y'all identified additional roads in the county and in those areas you highlighted that we can work together on?
We have a whole, in fact, I've got a map I'll show you that's got, we have priority areas, and I will show you that map here in just a minute. So,
okay, well, thank you.
So the other activities, now, unpaved roads are a very important part of it. Just stream bank erosion is another important part of it.
I know, yep.
So what we've done recently, we actually, there were 3 of these unpaved road grant program training workshops done last year, and the Alliance hosted one of them in Goshen last October. It's prerequisite for being able to apply for an unpaved roads grant from the state of Arkansas. Some road folks from Washington County came and took that course, and they're able to do that work. So that was a good thing. It's one of the things that we sponsored that. We submitted grant applications to the county for various projects, some of them successful, some of them not quite so much, but we're going to keep working on that. Coordinate with planning staff on native plant development. We've talked with them about some changes perhaps to what we can do in terms of suggesting native plants to be placed on new developments or even redevelopments. We conduct a lot of watershed education and coordinate activities with various county departments out there. Let's see. Well, I'll talk quickly. We've done a couple of surveys to see how people feel about water, and this is for Benton, Madison, Washington counties. November 2017, so it's fresh as far as these surveys are concerned. 70% of folks said that there's a water problem they'd like to see addressed. 57% agreed that water quality in Beaver Lake is endangered for a lot of the reasons we just talked about. Mud going in the lake, that is really our number one problem. Now, they didn't get that mud was the number one problem. I kind of jumped the gun there on that one. 53% disagreed with the statement, there's nothing I can do. A lot of folks understand there are things that we can all do to protect Beaver Lake. So a little more on that. They were almost unanimous that we need to protect habitat for fish and wildlife. We're trying to get more grants to do actual fish habitat restoration in Beaver Lake. Now that's not upstream of Beaver Lake, that's actually in the lake. The lake's 50 years old, a little more than that. And a lot of trees are in the lake, great fishing for a long time. Well, those trees have rotted. So now we're looking for additional habitat, and those trees provide the habitat, so we're working on that. 99% agreement, the lake is important to folks, which I appreciate. 73% of respondents agreed that preventing pollution is less than the cost of treating that polluted water. So if you can stop it from being polluted in the first place, it's a lot cheaper than trying to treat it on the back end. That's something that most folks understand. One thing that we did this survey, we looked at what sorts of things do people consider to be most important for as sources of pollution for the lake? Well, the number one response, and everybody could probably see this, because you see it, it's trash. But actually, the trash was the number one response. Poorly maintained septic systems, wastewater treatment discharge, runoff from various places. The number one source of pollution in the lake is actually not it's the bottom one. It's the stream bank erosion. I talked about that 4 acres of loss. What we see, though, is what gets removed every day by the Beaver Water District and by the other water providers on the lake. Every day, it's mud, it's sediment. A ton of sediment, and this is about a ton of sediment, this picture right here. Well, I didn't mean to go do that yet. This picture right here is about a ton of sediment, has about a pound of phosphorus in it. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, except that we put 250,000 tons of sediment every year in the lake. That's a lot of phosphorus. Phosphorus is what fuels algae growth and the growth of noxious weeds and other things in the lake. So we're trying to reduce that. And removing that sediment, there's a cost to all that mud you see there. That costs a fair amount to remove that the water suppliers are doing that. They have the capability of doing it. But if they don't have to remove as much, it's much more cost effective for them and cheaper for us. Look at it that way.
Is that done at the treatment plant?
Yes, sir. There's actually, I took that picture at their separation facility at the treatment plant. So it's kind of cool to sit there and watch the mud plop off, and you realize, oh, that actually came out of the drinking water supply. And that picture was taken when it wasn't a whole lot. It was the middle of summer, and you don't think there's a lot of mud. Well, there's still plenty of mud coming down the river. So unpaved roads. This is part of what you're asking about, Justice Bowman.
Right in Springdale.
I'd be happy to answer questions.
Oh, sorry.
That's quite right.
She's asking where the treatment plant was, as explained in Springdale.
Well, the reason I ask is I work right down the road from the treatment plant on Broyles in Farmington. And
Okay,
we've gone.
that's the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
Yeah. We're talking about the drinking water treatment plant, and it's not quite on this map. It's just off this map. It's just over north of the county line, well, a little further north than that, but it's in Benton County. It's where the first water intake is. The other treatment plant you may be familiar with is the Nolan plant, which is about where this blue line is. You see this middle piece of water, which is the lower white. The Nolan plant is the other part of the treatment that we have for the city of Fayetteville. Nolan is the largest wastewater treatment plant that puts wastewater in Beaver Lake. Now, they do a tremendous job of treating it. They have a certain permitted limit, and they haven't come halfway up to that in a long time. There's a lot of concern, I'll just talk quickly about Nolan, that's producing a lot, putting a lot of phosphorus and all of that in the lake. Well, ton of sediment has a pound of phosphorus in it. We've got 250,000 tons of sediment going in the lake every year. A lot more phosphorus is coming in from sediment load than it is coming out. It could possibly ever come out of that wastewater treatment plant or any of the wastewater treatment plants. So not that they still need to do their job for sure. So we have unpaved road priorities in Washington County's portion of the Beaver Lake watershed, and that's what this graphic shows. The priority is based upon what the county needs. We can't do unpaved roads without addressing what the county's needs are for that. And they have a critical need for maintenance, and I've had conversations with you, Justice Bowman, and with Chief Gales about those very things. And the other priority for us, for the Alliance, is unpaved road priority areas. Those are areas where the slope is greater than 13%, which is kind of steep for an unpaved road, and they're within 25 feet of a stream, which is a lot of these streams. So I got the statistics in there. The West Fork is 50% unpaved, or at least it was in 2006. Richland Creek is 87%, that's on the eastern side of the county, 87% unpaved. Brush Creek, 75% unpaved. So there's a lot of unpaved roads out there. Certainly that shouldn't surprise anybody in terms of where we are in Arkansas. We drive on unpaved roads almost all the time. So this is sort of addressing what the question you asked about the priorities. And this isn't, this is actually for the Middle Fork, and I'll zoom into this one too. What we've got, we put together a series of maps that actually for each of our subbasins, each of these magenta areas represent areas where we have identified this is an area that would be of priority to the Alliance. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a priority for the county, but it is a priority for the Alliance because of that slope and because of that proximity to streams. And this is just one of the several maps that we have. Let me back out so I can read the slide. So we did a lot of these maps. We did them for pasture, stream bank, conservation lands, within to direct the sorts of things that we do actually within the watershed. So that unpaved road, our focus is on roads greater than 13% slope and 25 feet of streams. So I've got I can go into a lot more detail about that, but I don't know if how much in the weeds you want to do. But that's the sort of priority that we have for these things, what the county needs and what fits our definition too. So here's what we did in 2019. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got a question? Go ahead,
Sure,
Stan.
please. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just kind of curious how significant the pesticide runoff is from lawns as far as impacting Beaver Lake.
Well, we don't measure pesticide concentrations in the lake itself because generally it's below detection. That's not saying it's not important to it, but it generally, when you get to the lake, it is below detectable limits from that standpoint. And it's also expensive to measure pesticides. But anything that's going to run off of your lawn and get into the watershed, get downstream, is going to be harmful. If you can put that stuff in the ground, let the ground treat it, it does so much better. So what we try to get folks to do is to put in rain guards and things like that will actually put that runoff, whether it's pesticides from whatever you're using, herbicides, put it into the ground. You think, well, it's put in the ground, it's going to make it worse. Well, actually, the ground is a very effective way of treating a lot of these harmful chemicals that we have. So if we can have more of those sorts of things, rain gardens or this low-impact development idea, trying to get that stuff back into the ground so that it is treated by that ground, that's the best thing we can do for it right now. Now, I'm not saying that we don't. I go back to the cost of detection of pesticides. It's an expensive process, and in my experience, I spent 21 years managing lakes in Florida. It's hard to detect where those pesticides came from and that they're having a measurable effect, except we know they are because they're killing plants and they're killing other things.
I was going to say, by the time they're killing fish and plants,
it's too late.
It's at a level where we certainly could detect it,
yes,
probably.
Yes, ma'am. That's exactly right.
But we don't have any kind of programs to assist people with understanding why not to do that.
Well, except for educational programs that we need to promote more. That's the sort of things that we work with the county extension office on to try to get folks to understand that there are certain amounts of pesticides that you can and use safely on your lawn, but there are certain amounts that are, more is not better when it comes to that stuff. And a lot of folks don't understand that, particularly when it comes to using nutrients on your lawn, fertilizing your lawn. Well, more is better. No, it's not, actually. Right. Anything excess, those plants, the grass isn't going to take that up. It's going to run off. Or get into the groundwater runoff. You don't need to use more than the grass will actually grow, and the extension office is excellent. They have fantastic folks who help us do that.
Okay, let me ask you this about stream bank protection. I know that Fayetteville has been considering banning or putting some kind of charge onto single-use plastic bags.
Yes, ma'am.
And I've got property that it does abut a stream bank here in Fayetteville. It's the stream. I own both banks. Mm-hmm. And I'm forever picking up plastic bags that have gotten tangled around brush, and it redirects the water where it can eat at the bank, which is a problem.
Yeah.
Do you find that plastic bags in our waterways are messing up banks?
In the larger systems down, and when we're talking about the West Fork or those tributaries, there's so much flow that it's a small amount. But it goes back upstream, though. You're exactly right. It's a very good point. Everything, really, the energy that's causing that erosion, that 4 acres of loss downstream, is starting by something upstream that's been channelized. And anything you put in there that's going to reduce the ability of that bank to do its job, which is to grow plants or to absorb that energy, like plastic bags is going to cause a problem. So I can certainly see that. We don't see it necessarily in the larger areas downstream because it tends to get blown on out. But certainly in the smaller streams and those headwaters, yeah, it's very important that we protect those things.
Okay, one last thing, your
Sure.
map with the pink spots where it was.
Yes, ma'am. Slope.
Steep terrain on
13%,
roads.
yes, ma'am.
I don't guess there's anybody that's going out there and just paving the pink parts. That would
Well,
be
paving
worse
it is
than a
not
patchwork.
necessarily going to do what we need done. What we need to, because if you just pave that, it's going to increase the amount of runoff.
And make it faster
and then
on the
make
other
it faster
part.
downstream. There are ways, there are best management practices that have been adapted by the folks who do it, the road and bridge departments and those folks who've been through this training program that will allow you to actually, you can keep an unpaved road in place just fine. Unpaved roads, we're going to have a lot of unpaved roads. And you can actually reduce the amount of runoff so that you don't have those problems caused by that in those areas. So there are best
And our
management
road
practices.
department knows how to do that?
Yes, ma'am, they do. It's just a
Okay.
matter of being able to put the effort meaning the funding in place. That's why we try to get a bigger project together. In fact, that we had one that we put together back in January. This first one here, the ANRC non-point source pollution grant, 319 grant, put an application in. We're going to do Parker Branch. $250,000. I thought it was a great project. Everybody thought it was a great project, except some of the folks who we were trying to get match from, and they wanted us to do something somewhere else, and so they didn't fund that one. The county was successful, though, and I'm very, very glad that they picked that up and did that. Sharon Lloyd is the one, I think, who made the application. So very successful in March 2019, made an application to, at that time, it was the State Unpaved Roads Program was administered by the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. Since then, state government's reorganized, so they moved the Unpaved Roads Program over to the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission. So the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission now is the one in charge of the Unpaved Roads Program and the Non-Point Source Program. It makes sense at some administrative level, but I don't know, I'm not at that level. So they've done one project, and I may have the number wrong on here, but I know next year there's going to be another opportunity for more projects to be done through this program.
All right.
So let me move along here. So 2020 grant applications. Talking about the Unpaved Roads Program, which is something we had focused on. It was a state program established in 2015, didn't have a lot of funding at that time, but now it's administered by the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission, and they always, now whenever you say Arkansas Natural Resources Commission, you need to add on there as a division of the Arkansas Department of Agriculture. That's just something they ask us to do. The application will open again for March 2020 funding. The grant limit is now $75,000 per project, 50-50 match, kind of like what we had last time. One thing, if you're trying to do a project that's over $25,000, there's a fellow named Steve Stake, who we work with the Beaver Watershed Alliance, who wants to come out and take a look at what's going on out there. And there's a list of those best management practices that will help us do a good job with things available. Rule is that only one grant may be open per governmental entity at a time, but I think you can have them backed up. I don't know, that's something to ask ANRC, if you can do that sort of thing. So the Alliance focus on identified road BMP priorities, we looked through those. I've got a bunch more of those. I don't want to get in the weeds. We can get in the weeds later about that. And statewide, this program is going to provide $300,000 in funding for 2020. They're hoping to grow that program. So that comes my next bullet. Last year, I'd applied to Arkansas Natural Resources Commission for funding for that unpaved roads program. Well, this year, the focus is on low-impact development, green infrastructure projects. And the Alliance is talking about several of those right now with the ANRC. We're trying to identify them. We've got some identified up in Benton County. I'd love to identify some in Washington County. So we'd probably be talking with staff to try to see about those sorts of things. And when I sat down and talked with Tony Ramick, who's the head of the Non-Point Source Program with the state, he didn't give me any indication that they were going to be doing the unpaved roads through their non-point source funding again this year through 319. Maybe they will in the future, but they're really trying to grow that unpaved roads program. He'd love to see that program be at $1 million a year in 5 years, and that would help us if we can do that. The other thing he told me was to keep applying, and so demonstrate the need. I'm thinking, I got better things to do with my time than to keep applying and have you deny me. But anyway, I didn't say that. So what we're looking at is the changes that are going to take place over the next several years. This is from our watershed protection strategy. In 2006, you look, most of the watershed here is green. Green is forest, almost all, or percent perviousness, if you will. A lot of these yellow areas are the areas that were paved. This is 2006 data. Fast forward, and this is not current, this is 2055. We're projecting into the future. They're projecting quite a bit of increase in terms of what's going to go on in Madison County. Most of this area along the west side of the Beaver Lake and then the White River is going to be impervious. Lot more pavement in those sorts of areas. So watershed-wide, what our prediction is that, and this is a prediction from the 2009 study, forest is going to decrease from 60% down to 70%, down to 60% coverage, that seems like that's a fair amount of forest we're going to lose. Pasture we're going to lose down from 21% down to 15%. We'll see if that comes about or not. The thing that's going to change the most is this idea of low-density development. That doesn't mean low-impact development. That's where you have a house on an acre with a septic tank. Don't get me wrong. I've had septic tanks for years. You maintain them. They do a good job. But it's hard to put 500,000 people on an acre with a septic tank. You can't really do that sort of a thing. It's not really going to be feasible. We're going to continue to grow. 30 people a day, 33 people a day, I think we're up to now. So this low-density development is going to probably increase the amount of sediment erosion that we see coming on downstream. This is just a real quick view of conservation priorities. Excuse me, another map that we had put together. The areas that are highlighted in, look at these, come on now, help me out here. There we go. These hatched areas are areas we've already identified that we have landowners who are interested in working with us. And the darker the color, the more likely we're going to be working with them to put a lot of these lands in conservation. Voluntary conservation, that's all we do is voluntary stuff. We do pick up trash. In 2018, we picked up we didn't do it ourselves. There's only 7 people working for the Beaver Watershed Alliance. But we leverage several hundred folks every spring and fall to help us pick up trash. 2,392 pounds last year, 5,260 pounds to date this year, but we're not done. We got fall cleanups to go. We did a little bit of recycling, I think, reporting of recycling this year, 880 pounds of recyclables. We also do, we've had in the past, and I say in the past because we don't have funding for it this coming year. We're a nonprofit. If we don't get the funding for something, we can't do it. So we had this free tree and shrub program. We love that free tree and shrub program, but the grant didn't come through this year. So last year, 2018, we planted 16,000 trees. This year is 16,700 last year, 16,600 this year. We slipped a little bit. That's a lot of trees. Bare root seedlings throughout the watershed. We really would want to keep that program going, but that grant didn't come through this year. You can't get it every year, and that's okay. So we're going to take a year off, and we'll do it again better in the future. Costs about $25,000 for us as an alliance for our staff to purchase the trees and to manage the giveaway. We don't just hand them out to people. We go out and do a site visit and say, okay, this is the sort of tree that fits on your property. These are the sorts of things that you need to do to keep that tree growing. And we are actually going to work with you. And we don't help everybody plant because that's a lot of trees. But we make sure that they're doing the right things from there. So we've done some support with the Washington County Planning Department. We actually review those. We get the email that reports the development plans. We look at them, and some of them are, particularly in terms of environmental development, things like that, we will make some comments on them, but usually it's beyond our scope because we're not a regulatory agency. We just try to provide some input. One of the things that we did make comment on back in July was something that came through that was going to have to put in a lot of, at the time it was called vegetation of some sort. Well, the vegetation list, we looked at it, and it wasn't native plants. It said it was native plants, but some of these were going to be highly invasive exotics. So we helped the planning folks say, okay, well, this is really what you need to put in here. We'd like to work more closely with them to develop that more firmly, and we're hoping to do that. We look at, we have expertise in water quality impacts, low impact development, green infrastructure. We want to work with the county to improve and do all these things to protect Beaver Lake. So our priority is sediment reduction. Number one source of pollution is sediment. Streambank erosion is the highest contributor, although those unpaved roads are pretty high up on the list. And low-density development, loss of pasture land, forest are going to have an increasing impact. They're going to increase the amount of sediment we see going downstream. What's this? So it's developing slowly. So we have opportunities abound, state unpaved road program. We like to focus on those segments that have high erosion potential. Education, just as we were talking about in terms of rain gardens or doing something to put that water back in the ground, to slow that down, to keep those pesticides and things from going in the lake. Low impact development projects, I'm hoping to develop more of those. Support the work of existing county departments. Explore, coordinate grant development as much as we possibly can. And stormwater abatement, looking at residential green infrastructure is one of the things we want to do, and more source water protection. So that's all I have for y'all. Thank you very much. That's all of us. Myself, Becky is program director. Melissa and Nate are program coordinators. Carrie is our outreach coordinator. Barbara is my right-hand administrative assistant, and Kayla actually does all our watershed research work. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Myself and JP Pond attended a Illinois River watershed kind of information conference earlier this year. Do you work in conjunction with the Illinois?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay, because that's more the west side of the county.
That certainly is the west side. They have different issues. Some of their priorities are the same. One thing they don't have that we do have, is they don't have 500,000 people drinking water out of their lake. So that's kind of our priority. They also have a much larger area that they have to service. They also have, that's where the growth is happening, and that's where we have, the largest urban area we have is where we're sitting right now in Fayetteville. They have Springdale, the rest of Fayetteville, almost all of Rogers, Bentonville, and all that growth that's going on out throughout Benton County and Washington County that they are having to contend with in terms of sediment increases and things like that. They're doing a tremendous job. They've reduced the nutrient concentrations in the Illinois River at the Oklahoma line almost to where Oklahoma's happy, but not quite. It's hard to make Oklahoma happy.
Right, right.
So they're getting there. But we work very closely. Nicole and I talk a lot about those sorts of things that go on.
And another question, what was interesting to me whenever I attended this conference was that I was informed that the water gets tested at Tyson. Is that where all the water gets tested?
I don't know about that.
There's a lab, apparently. There's a lab at Tyson.
I believe that they probably, when it comes to the water quality that they're testing for, some of the things that Tyson does have a lab, and that may be a part of their cooperative agreement with the Illinois River Watershed Partnership. The water quality testing that we do in the West Fork, we actually have a contract with University of Arkansas, and they do our water testing. So I'm not saying that one's better than the other one, but I prefer.
I was just curious if it was the same.
And
lab.
the other side of it is that the Beaver Water District does a tremendous amount of testing. Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality does testing, particularly downstream from wastewater treatment plants. So there's a lot of water quality data that's being collected out there. We have stream gauges that we monitor continuously, trying to get a handle. We have these 100-year floods happening every summer, so that we look at those sorts of things as well, and trying to help us understand what's going on, the changes in our watershed.
Thank you. Okay, I just had one more question for you. There had been pockets of childhood cancer associated with certain areas in Washington County, including Prairie Grove and West Fork. Recently, in last year, I believe, a high number of children came down with leukemia. Is there any kind of research provided into like the water and how that could possibly affect like runoff? Have you?
Well, that's kind of beyond our purview in the Alliance.
Right.
We're really
You're
focused
a
on
volunteer,
protecting.
I understand.
I would imagine there's a lot of other epidemiological research being done in those areas, particularly when it comes to childhood cancer.
Yeah.
That gets a lot of people's attention
Sure.
Rather quickly, and very well it should. But I don't know of any research that's being done specifically on the water. The water that comes out of the tap, it isn't always the water that goes in that the water treatment folks put together. It might be something local that's going on. I don't know anything at all about that. And there is also a whole myriad of other physiological factors that can
Right.
affect cancer rates and things like that.
Thank you.
Sure enough.
Well, Clell, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. I hope everybody understands there's a lot of mutual benefits here. The lake needs to be kept clean for our drinking water. We all know we're all dependent on that. The other thing is they've been helping us with county roads to help improve those as well. So, Mr. Ford, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I
coming.
appreciate it. If you have other questions, you have my card and contact information. So
Thank you
thank you all
very
very
much.
much.
Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Commissioner. Just speak up.
Is there any way that we would ever know how much pollution boats and people put in that lake?
That is something that we are very concerned about, actually, in terms of the lake part of the watershed. Back in the summer, back in June, they had the problems with closing all those swim beaches, and they attributed a lot of that closure initially to certain wastewater treatment plants. Well, that was probably actually caused by geese. But those are the sorts of things we need to do more understanding of. We need to have a better handle on, particularly the boat issue. The main thing that boats do right now, you have these big old wake boats, and they come along and they erode the shoreline. They'll throw up these big old wakes, and they'll cause a lot more sediment to go in the lake. The other issue we have, we don't have it so much, well, I guess we do have it here, is what's the impact of septic systems on lakes? That's another human, where there's no real regulation of those sorts of things, something else we're also going to be looking at a great deal more up on the lake itself. So something that the Beaver Water District is concerned about, something that the Benton Washington Regional Water Authority is concerned about, Carroll Boone, all those folks are concerned about it. We just have to, we have to put more effort into figuring that out. So, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all very much.
All right. Well, I think we got a radio committee report coming up. Mr. Luther, you going to have anybody help you?
Get myself out of your way.
That's all right. Here, you take this chair.
Josh got a hold of his hand, buddy.
Well, this way, if there's any questions for him, he'll already be up here.
I'm just here because I'm easier to look at than him.
Truth hurts. Well, we wanted to bring information to you that we've been working on, as you know, for quite some time. We've had a lot of meetings related to the radio system and what to do, what's best for the users of the system, which was our priority, and then how is it best to be provided by the county. And at this time, what we feel like operationally, the best thing for us to do is look at joining the AWIN radio system with P25 infrastructure. It's what our peers, the majority of our peers have done. We did look at other systems, but we feel like longevity, and I said operationally, probably that's going to be the best bet for us. And so what we've got, and each of you have this in front of you, was some numbers that we put together as an estimate as to what the move to that system would be. You see the infrastructure listed there. We're going to be adding, if it's approved to do this, 4 towers within the county. One would be in Hazel Valley, one would be in Winslow, one in Morrow, the southwest part of the county, and then the western part of the county at Lincoln Lake. That proposal for the infrastructure would provide 5 of the needed consoles for central EMS, and then 7 consoles at the sheriff's office, and then that would be the addition of 2 channels for the needed capacity in the city of Fayetteville at those 3 tower sites there. And then we would obviously have the additional funding need down there for the radio units, which is somewhat a fluid number because agencies add and get rid of a truck, add a truck, and then they add another truck to fill a need, and add a patrolman or a fireman. And so those numbers, they fluctuate depending on staffing and things, but the closest we could get at this point is 1,727 units. And then I worked with Chief of Staff on some of these contingency funds and project management funds, legal and bond charges, which that's really out of my scope of work. I'm not totally familiar with that, so we tried to put some numbers there. And certainly those could change depending on the costs. But Our recommendation is to make the move to the AWIN system, and you see the cost there, right at $8.5 million. I think when we actually crunch these numbers down, we're about $16 off, but it was in our radio user units. So if somebody runs the math, it'll be, I think, 3 cents a radio off, and we just said at this point, we're close enough that for $16, we'll just make it
Okay,
$8.5.
on those radios, 1,727,
Yes.
when a vehicle changes, will those radios be moved from one vehicle to the
They
next?
can, yes. Portables obviously are on the user's belt or in their
right.
coat pocket or whatever. The mobiles then can be moved, and I'll let Captain McConnell speak on that because you move them from one patrol car to the other. And
Yes, I mean, all of them will still be moved to the different patrol units or the individual officers that's got them. So I think right now what we went on was the 1,727 units that we have on our system today. So that's not adding, if Farmington wants to add 5 more people, or if we want to add 30 more people, or whoever wants to add more people, that's not counting their radios. They'd be out of pocket on that side.
Okay, all right.
Right?
this will kind of get us to where we are today. That's
Okay,
correct.
now these radio systems, are they the Motorola systems as well, or are they something else?
At this point, there's not a decision made on what radios to use. We felt like as a committee, the best thing to do there is let each of the agencies look at what they feel like is best going to serve them. We did get costs from Motorola back here, and that's part of what we base these numbers on, is work with them to get a cost for radios. And I spoke to Mr. Gordon today with Motorola, and he said in Benton County, Joe helped me, they're doing something very similar. And they're allowing the users to have an allotment per radio, and if they want to spend more or less, that's totally up to them, because some of the features change within the radio. Is that right?
And it was mostly geared towards the volunteer fire departments, what do they say? And they ran the funding, right? So
Right.
here's how much will the county's gonna kick in, if you want anything over and above that, that's up to y'all.
Right.
Okay. Anything else you need to tell us at this point?
No, sir, I think that, I want to say this. I think we've done everything we can, and I really want to commend the people that were on the committee and the agencies that allowed them to come and spend their time. I know everyone I sent the message to be here tonight, 2 were out of state and 1 was on shift. And the others, even Chief Coker, he's back here representing the Fire Association, and of course Josh. And so they've been very committed to this. J.P. Lemming, I think, can second that they've really put a lot of time in trying to do what's best for the county.
You've done a lot of traveling to look at some of these systems too, don't you?
We have done some, yes.
Yeah, okay. All right, do we have any, oh yeah, got questions over here. Sue? Or Eva, go ahead. Eva? Oh, I'm sorry, Ann, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that 1,727 units cover the rural fire departments, and this is a basic price that will be charged, and if they want something better than that, then they have to pay for it themselves. If they get something a little bit cheaper, then it saves the county.
That's correct, ma'am. It's 1,727 units, and that includes rural fire, sheriff's office, small-town municipal law enforcement, coroner's office, our office, central EMS. Who am I missing? Anybody?
He
I got the
he said
sheriff's office.
sheriff. He said sheriff.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure that regardless what the various entities choose for their radio of choice, all these radios will all talk to each other and
Oh,
be
yes, ma'am.
compatible and have the same kind of level of operation and reliability.
Yes, one thing on the state system is there is a standard set that the Office of Emergency Communications with Department of Homeland Security puts out, and that's one thing that the state requires, is that the radios that come onto the state system, and in essence, if we join, we will be partnering with the state. There's requirements there that they have to meet certain standards, and yes, ma'am, that's the case.
Okay.
Are there any perks to joining AWIN with the state? Is the state going to
Well, and part of
look
that,
kindly
yes.
on us for?
Yes, I believe they will. Certainly, we would have to make application and be approved to come on. But one of the major benefits is that the state then takes over the maintenance of your tower site equipment. We still certainly would have to lease those towers from a tower provider, but the state then takes over the maintenance of that equipment.
For how long?
I guess the life of the system, I've never heard them turn
Okay.
anyone
Well,
down.
let's watch the contract.
Yeah, and there's certainly things that when we sit down with the state, given we will be approved, then we can work those details out, and certainly we would. And I've done quite a few of those over the years on the committee, and I've always felt like that they're very favorable to bringing new people onto the system and wanting to grow the system for interoperability.
And I assume we could make this happen as fast as we can find the money?
Well, yes, ma'am. I believe that as soon as we have the funding available, then I think that we could look at the contracts and purchases. And the build-out's going to be the
Towers.
slowdown, if you will. And of course, that's out of our hands. But I do believe that the manufacturer wants to, and the vendor wants to push that out as quickly as possible.
Yep, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was some, I think the article in the paper this morning generated some discussion that I saw, and the two questions that I saw asked the most were, was there such a range in the estimate? I'm not sure, it looked like maybe the papers you provided didn't have that range, but there were some questions as to why there was this $2 million gap in the range. And then the second question was, how did Benton County get such a better deal than we were getting?
Yeah, Benton County's not doing some things like we're doing, like the addition of the capacity at Fayetteville. I don't know that the amount that they were allocating for each of the user units was as much. And I also know that some of those early numbers didn't necessarily include everyone's radio. And so that cost figure was obviously lower.
Yeah, because it was like $3 or $4 million
And
lower.
if you take 1,000 radios at $1,750 out of the picture immediately, you're almost 2 million lower right there. And then you've got the capacity at Fayetteville. So there's certainly differences, yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of the range, Captain McConnell, you look like you're about to answer that question.
Well, I was gonna say, as far as the
Oh.
difference between the Benton County and the Washington County, estimates, I got a copy of the contract for Benton County, and I actually had, Josh and them send me some information on that. Some of the stuff is the consoles they don't have. We have 12 consoles going in, 7 at county, 5 at, Central. They didn't have that many consoles. They also did not have some towers, sites. So some of them big ticket items wasn't included on the Benton County side,
Okay.
where we needed them for our side. So that was a big price difference on that.
Okay,
And when you hear about a console, you say, well, what does that mean? Well, it's the radio system that the dispatcher sits in front of and utilizes every day, and that's just under $50,000 per seat. So it doesn't take very many of those to really add up to quite a bit. But if I'm not mistaken, that includes headsets and the whole package right there for the dispatcher.
If I might, so we're touching 9 different sites to do Washington County coverage.
Yes.
Benton County's 4. And that, so the scope of work on it was twice as much, okay, is what drives the cost.
well, because they have more people than we do.
It's gonna be the terrain,
It's the what?
the
Terrain, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, certainly western and southern and eastern, southeastern, and southwestern parts of Washington County, I mean, it's probably easier to cover a big portion of Colorado than our southern area because of the topography change. Topography change there is so drastic. When we worked the plane crash the other night, Captain McConnell and I worked very closely on that incident to manage that, and we worked from multiple radio systems, because at one location, we would have coverage with one, and at another location, we would have another system we would have coverage from, but not at the same time. And so honestly, I can tell you, we're very excited to know that this would resolve that issue.
Okay,
And so that's very important to us, but it costs money to do that.
okay, and so the estimate that you all believe, the 6.5 to 8.5, no offense to our representative from the paper that's here, but is that accurate, what was in the paper?
Yeah, and the number
Okay.
you see there is 8.5, and that's
Okay.
radios, infrastructure, and other fees that, again, is not really in my wheelhouse. We could look at Councilor Lester.
We didn't get it, so, because
Oh,
we're
I'm
not on the
sorry, I
committee,
got
so
you.
I wasn't sure
Yeah.
what it said.
Yeah.
Okay, so was well, so we're, 6.5 is better than 8.5, so what was?
Well,
Is
I
that,
think the 6.5 was the initial cost with 720 radios.
yeah, that's why I said if you took that.
With,
oh,
I think that also had a sunset tower also on that one, which is a tower that we decided to do away with because we didn't think that the cost would be there for us.
okay,
For the 500,000 and getting, what was it, 1.something% coverage, we didn't think it'd be sufficient where it was located at. So that's why some of the price changes, numbers have changed. This was the final at the 4.9 million.
To include all users' radios. Well,
Well, just include the infrastructure.
right.
okay, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Pine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's this gonna do for the old little square pagers that the fire department's volunteers carried forever?
We've been told that these pagers will allow us the ability to broadcast off of our paging system, and we'll be able to continue that, and so nothing should change there.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, did you have something?
But if that don't work, Butch, they're about $500 a piece to replace them. Can you tell me how many square miles Springdale covers?
No, sir.
I mean, because that's the big difference of Eva's, because our towers are gonna cost about $750 a piece, right,
I think it's very
750,000?
close, yes.
And we're gonna build 4? That's where a lot of that cost is coming from, too. And our square miles is 990, and theirs is probably, what?
Well, we
Joe,
know
do you know?
Fayetteville's 55. Yeah.
60,
Huh?
50, 60 square miles
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, I mean, that's where our difference is.
Okay, all right, thank you. I got a question.
Yes, sir.
These towers we're putting in, can we lease space to cell phone companies and that kind of thing on these other towers?
Well, understand, what we're doing when we say we're putting up a tower is we're just going to an existing structure that is already there, possibly as a cell phone tower, and we're putting our radio equipment there on the site. We're
I
putting our
thought you were
RF
talking,
equipment.
I thought you were talking about building towers.
No, sir, there's no cost for us included in this to build towers. I think that adds, gosh, another couple $100,000 to
Okay,
half
so
a
those-
million to each site.
So
So
there's already cell phone towers at these 4 sites you're mentioning here.
that's correct. In fact, at this point, we are currently on 2 of them with our system today. And so that will be something that we're very familiar with there. And the other 2,
Okay.
one will be constructed and the other one exists
Okay,
already in
all right.
place.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go on.
I want to make a motion to send it to Finance and Budget.
Second.
Are we ready for that yet?
In the form
I guess. I'm sorry? Turn your mic on so I can hear you. I can't hear. What do we do on this thing? We want to just vote on that, send it on, or should we talk about the financing issues?
Do you have
Huh?
I think it depends on what it is you're asking to do. Are you asking to do a sales tax on this? I mean, what are you proposing to send on?
This is my whole point, that I'd like to go ahead and talk about some possibilities, considerations about how we might proceed with this thing, because,
Maybe you need to withdraw the motion.
I'm sorry?
The motion
I
needs-
move to withdraw the motion.
Well, thank you, sir. Motion withdrawn. Now then,
Let's see, okay.
I'd like for us to go ahead and talk about this thing from a standpoint, or where do we come up with $8.5 million? Mr. Gales, would you approach the mic and talk to us about some of this stuff?
No. No.
He's got lots of money.
Chairman Bowman, you're the one that has a lot of money.
Sir?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Carl Gales, Chief of Staff. Thanks, Harvey.
Anytime, friend.
We were looking at $8.5 million, and we've looked at around $8 million for other programs. So I put together some options that we might look at on financing this project. Of course, the old standby is have an election and do a bond issue. Well, I was told that an 8-cent sales tax will yield approximately $10 million, and I think that I'm wrong on that. I think that's 2 years. I think a quarter cent was a $10 million.
Quarter is.
Yeah.
Quarter's $10 million. So that would be, if an eighth would be a 2-year program on sales tax with a sunset clause. If we've got $8.5 million when the sales tax yields $8.5 million, then it sunsets. And that's one of the options that I looked at that would be possible. Timing, primary election, March 2020 would probably be the earliest. Special elections are costly, and so the time frame of getting things and the programs and getting it out to the public for where we could support it. Because this, sales tax is not real popular.
You're right.
So that's one of the ways that would be for financing it. Number 2 would be a project financed by a commercial loan and repaid with yearly budget amounts from each of the entities paying. Talking about a 20-year loan, you're talking about $450,000 a year divided up with all the entities. And well, what is an entity? An entity would be a city, the CMS, the DEM, the Sheriff's Department, the rural fire departments, and all of our other groups that's participating in this. How that breaks down would be proportional to what each one is getting and what they would be paying yearly. This is another possible solution. And then always we look at the possibility of some grants paying part of it, paying part of option number 1 or paying part of option number 2 to reduce the burden on us. In a discussion today with John, there are some grants that are out there, particularly for our rural fire departments we know of, but we've got a period of time now, we haven't really pursued grants in this particular fashion. So if we want to pursue every course, and of course, with grants, you continue to look at that, and we could do that all the way up to the election or all the way up to the project where we first get. And then one of the things that's brought forward, are there any lease programs to defer the cost and get it down to a lower lease payment plan, 5 years, 10 years? Motorola has indicated they do have lease options, but we're at the point now of saying, hey, we've got $8.5 million, and it's up to the quorum court and to the justices of peace to decide which action and continue, let's do the homework. I think the first possible requirement that we would have if we want to go to the sales tax issue is sometime in January we have to schedule that for the election, I believe, for the March election.
For the March election,
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
because I had talked to Jennifer about a possibility of a fire department that wants to do their dues at an election, and she said it has to be done in December. No, last
That you
November.
have to make the
Yeah,
decision?
that make the decision then, yes.
Okay, so I wasn't really to date when
I'm
we got.
assuming that's the same,
Okay, and that's for the March primary?
yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's where we are.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm asking the question because I really don't know what this process is. Instead of a sales tax, is there any way you could piggyback a percentage tax on cell phones, cable, or anything like that? And I don't know what the process is of that would be.
I have no idea.
I mean, I
about that.
have to look at my cell phone bill at work, and it breaks down taxes for city, county, state, grandpa, grandma, and everybody else that's on there. It's amazing how many taxes are piggybacked onto your phone bill.
Yeah, I looked at mine last week, and there's no more space on the paper.
No, there's not. But I don't, truly, I don't know what the process of even looking at that and what kind of revenue that would bring in.
And I think the challenge is now for,
Because everybody wants a sales tax for either the jail, the firemen, the
Right.
postman, everybody just wants a sales tax. And so I just wanted to be cognizant of what's our sales tax gonna look like when we go to the store to buy milk and eggs? So,
Well,
anyway,
the pro-
I mean, is there a way that we can investigate, or what would be the path or the avenue we could take to find out? What does it take to get that added to, or like a 911, no, not 911.
yeah.
Hey, Mr. Luther, come on up so we can hear you, buddy.
To answer your question, yes, we can pursue all of this avenues, and we have October and
one
November
avenue.
to pursue. And I think we're in a direction now. We have settled one big hurdle on what system we wanted, which is the AWIN system, and we're in pretty well compliance with that. And the committee, I told them, I said, this is your last committee meeting that until further asked. But we're getting into legalities now. These guys they're the end users, so it's really up to the quorum court to decide how you're going to
Finance it?
and how you're going to outfit them. And all of the equipment we're been looking at is to specification. It is to the requirements of the state. We got out of this avenue that we were arguing this system, this brand, that brand. We're talking about standard specifications of meeting every product that's put into the system in compliance with the state.
Yep.
And we think that this 8.5 will cover it. We have some contingencies in it. There's sales tax. There's purchases that's going to be spread out over a 2-year period. If there's any savings that we can do, it's just like all the other projects that we go into. We'll pursue what we can get, and we'll look for every grant we can get.
All right. Mr. Luther, do you have something you want to thank us? Thank you, Carl.
I just wanted to answer Ms. Ecky's question about the 911 tax. That's collected by the state now as, for wireless wireless phones and other communications devices, and then it's given back to the counties with various formulas that they use, and they just raised that fee, but I don't see any way that the legislation would allow for us to tax additional monies onto that. I just don't think that there's any, I don't think there's even a reason to pursue it because of how it was set up. Yeah. It will send us money back for our 911 system to operate it, but in no way will we be able to do anything
So
else.
it's like an automated fund that has restrictions. You're supposed to use this money for operations only.
Yes.
And that's your 911 automated fund, correct?
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Lisa, I'd heard the other day that they started collecting that more, and that put like $8 million to go to the AWIN system, the P25 AWIN system, to upgrade and bring it back up to speed, spend more money on it.
Okay.
So that's the money that everybody keeps saying that it's free to, it turns it over to the state. Well, that's not. That money's coming from the taxpayers and the cell phones, and they're getting it somewhere.
Yeah.
So I guess the option to piggyback on something else other than the sales tax option wouldn't be feasible. We have to go through the legislature.
At this point, that's the reason I wanted to start this discussion tonight.
Okay.
I wanted us to begin to look at it. The quorum court's got a big responsibility here, coming up with $8.5 million to fund this thing, and we know we don't have that kind of surplus in the budget. So we're trying to figure out exactly how, and so I want everybody's head to go to work on this thing and come up with any help we can.
Well, and do we have a contingency, plan if the voters say no?
I know, that's a possibility. Okay, Angela?
So we don't, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one question, probably directed more towards the committee members, Mr. Luther. So if we were to talk about putting this into an election, the primary election in March, that's looking at 6 months out, what is that time frame doing for the county's needs right now? I mean, it seems like this is an urgent issue. So to put that, I mean, does that seem doable to you? That's my question, then I have a statement after it.
I think that's very reasonable, because as J.P. Bowman said, it is a major project within the county. It's something we're going to make a major investment in, and we want to do it right so that it serves us over a long period of time. We do always have the potential for failure, as I've mentioned in previous meetings. But our system is being maintained and it is operating. So at this point, end of the year's here, and March is right there. So I think that time frame is very reasonable. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I just had one other comment to make. I'm afraid about the other option of charging municipalities and departments who are using the systems. I worry the sheriff's budget's already strained, obviously. And number two, I would just want to say that we just passed to charge municipalities per capita rates or charge them per person held in the Washington County Jail. I feel like, I'm not sure that it's good timing for us to do something like that, and when we've already pushed something out there to them. And that's all I had.
Mr.
Thank
Lemon?
you.
Well, I think the sales taxes, I mean, I hate taxes and I hate raising taxes, but I think that's the way to go, if we can go that direction. Because whenever time you have ball games in town, you get a lot more people in town, you collect money faster. And if we do that right, it looks to me like if we could start collecting our money by the time this project's built out in 18 months, if it's a 2-year deal, this thing will be paid for before it ever goes online, if we do it right. And I know people's gonna scringe, but there's a lot of volunteer people out there, and there's a lot of people in our community that backs all these volunteer fire departments. And 90% of the people I talk to says, hell yeah, jump on, let's go. I mean, and I think that's what we need to, I think that's what we need to look at. So I think it's gonna be a good deal. Thank you.
Mr. Lemming, I always really appreciate your honesty. Ms. Ann, do you have something else to say?
I just wanted to
Well, I
piggyback
agree
on,
with J.P. Jenkins and Lemming. I think we need to get this funded, we need to get it paid for, and because if we stretch this out, it just costs more, it puts more strain on all of the small towns' budgets, and I agree that we've already come up with a per capita hit of $63.12. I think that I think all of these people that are a part of this, the fire departments, EMS, I think they will get out there and support this. It's not going to be just an issue for the quorum court to be supporting. We all, the sheriff's department, everyone needs to be out there campaigning for this, and I think it will pass because everybody out in the rural area depends on their rural fire departments for everything. So, thank you.
Okay, Andrea. You have something else? Okay, all right. Yeah, go ahead.
My next question is probably to Brian. By when do we have to get on the election if we're going to go that direction? I mean, how
So I
many
think
days?
the big
or
issue you run into with timing is once you pass, so it just depends on what you do. Let's say you do a sales tax, you ask for a bond, a tax bond. Statutorily, there's an amount of time after the quorum court passes said ordinance authorizing the bond to go forward until the time that you have to have the election. Off the top of my head, I haven't thought about it since the jail thing came up at the beginning of the year or at the end of last year. So I'm not exactly sure. It's like 60 days, 90 days is coming to mind. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there's an amount of time that you have to wait until it can go to election, and then there's an amount of time in which you have to have the election by. And so I can look that up and give you some more information at the next
We need to
meeting.
know to do that, because if we're going to try to get this by March, we can't stumble too long,
Yeah, yeah.
or we'll be in trouble.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Lisa, I just wanted to mention to you, if they do say no, we've got a plan, so don't worry. We'll have a plan for you, okay? Thank you.
Okay. Well, you know, the one thing I think we all recognize already is Northwest Arkansas right now is one of the high sales tax areas in the whole stinking country. And nobody likes that, including Harvey Bowman. I hate it, and I hate to ask people to continue to pay more in sales taxes. We know that our population is growing. It's going to be a persistent problem, and we're going to have to deal with these things. And, you know, I just hope that we'll all, throughout this county, from the bottom to the top, continue to look for ways to improve our efficiencies. We have got to improve efficiencies in our government. Our taxes are going to be a problem for a long time to come. Any other comments or suggestions before we go ahead and move to public comments? Okay, public comments.
Beth Koger, Fayetteville. I just have a few things I'd like to mention and maybe get answers to later. First of all, a few weeks ago, the sheriff's office came here and they They said that they suggested that we hire a consultant. I don't know what happened to that ideal, but I think that was a good ideal considering we're talking about $8.5 million. I don't object to an upgrade of the communication system. I haven't spoken to anyone that objects to an upgrade. I think everyone agrees we need that, but I just want to be sure that we get what we need at the best price, and that what we get will be something that we won't grow out of in a few years. And other things to consider is what will the yearly maintenance be for the new equipment. In Bentonville, their RMS maintenance increased $74,000 per year. Their tower rent increased $43,000 per year. Also in Bentonville, they had the smaller cities buy their own equipment, their own telephones, and that's like Bethel Heights, Cave Springs, Lowell, Centerton. Anyway, all the smaller cities, and it came to over $2.1 million. So what those cities have bought already, will that work with what we have here in Washington County? Also, Bentonville got incentives of over $1 million. They got $500,000 for trade-in, $928,000 incentives, just, I'm not sure what that was for, it just says incentives. And then they got $213,000 because of a bundle package. So that's something that I think we need to consider. Let me see what else I had. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Any other public comments? Okay, no other no further. All in favor, say aye. Meeting adjourned.
That didn't take